Off to YouTube we go. Exciting times. I was up way too fucking late last night. No fun. All right. We'll go ahead and start the event then and get going for some anti-Oediping. All right. All right, Jack, where did you have us? Come on. No?
Are we at 243?
All right. Excellent. See, JK is my new co-host.
Okay. Not at all.
All right. I'll share my PDF and we'll jump in. Any notes or thoughts from last week or over the week? Any questions we had where we wanted to spend a little bit more time before we dive forward? Because again, the complexity of this is fucking never ending, to say the least. Anyone? Anyone? No, nothing? Nothing? You got nothing for me? Okay.
So we're talking about the language, right? Language as a kind of a signifying, system, as well as psychoanalysis, of course.
Yeah. So 310 is capitalist representation. The focus of it is how within capitalism representation operates, because representation is fairly new actually to the system. The way that communication or graphism, voice, and the eye worked in Earth Socius, and then under the despot we had writing, which hardline codes. We had writing and voice become one. Representation takes another tack. It takes a new tactic. It builds something new that they're needing to really spend a lot of time on, because again, in order to get to Oedipus, we aren't quite there. We have a lot of after images. We have a lot of parts of it, but we haven't quite gotten to the point of this sort of the ability for an idea to sort of exist purely outside of things, yet also seem to encompass so many things at the same time. So how does capitalist representation get there? How does it operate is basically where we're at. Does that make sense? JK? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's make sense. So capitalism not only makes use of psychoanalysis, but also the linguistic system is really
well, psychoanalysis. Yeah, psychoanalysis makes use of all these parts as well, and that's again a big thing they're getting to, where we're talking about like how is the current system of representation operating? How does this work? And we like the idea. When I say we, I mean like the royal people like the idea of, oh no, it's we have this linguistic understanding of master signifier and these things, and they're like, no, there's even more decoding happening than just being able to sort of break that down and understand it. It's much, much, much more stringent decoding, as in almost totalizing, mathematically so. So they bring up, for example, Yelmslev, who wrote about basically an algebraic semiotics that sort of moves into this odd post-Saussurean way where instead of thinking about oh, well, this word in this context means this, and that's how it works. It's like, it's much deeper than that. It's the elements that make up the letters, that make up the words, that also have themselves sort of a non-signification, but that produce signification through the way they're operated, used, and how they manifest. And so, and actually, this is perfect because it'll give me a chance. The end of the previous paragraph we were on says, in short, Yelmslev's very special position in linguistics, the reaction he provokes, seems to be explained by the following. He tends to fashion a purely immanent theory of language that shatters the double game of voice graphism domination, that causes form and substance, content and expression to flux according to the flux of desire, that breaks these fluxes according to point signs and figure schizzes. This is the first sort of part that they're really wanting to talk about. The idea of voice graphism domination, the way that the written word controls what we understand it as, the way that it has a meaning that is imbued. We still see people talking like this today, and they'll get into why, but a word doesn't really have that kind of meaning anymore. It's not made up of the word being used and its definition. Instead, there's something much, much deeper happening within the parts of the word, or the, as they say, the form and substance, the content and the expression, which are sort of able to move according to desire itself, which is a big deal within Capital, that we have that sort of, again, decoding of desire, followed by the recoding, but that first part is very necessary. Second half, he says, far from being an overdetermination of structuralism and of its fondness for the signifier, Yomslev's linguistics implies the concerted destruction of the signifier. It constitutes a decoded theory of language, about which one can also say, an ambiguous tribute, that it is the only linguistics adapted to the nature of both the capitalist and the schizophrenic flux, until now the only modern, not archaic theory of language. It doesn't come with a lot of baggage of the voice or master signifier or signification that really expanded over the course of hundreds of years under despotism. It brings something wholly new to how linguistics can work now, is their point. And this is where we start getting into the next paragraph and on. Is everyone here like a super fan of Lyotard? Huh? Everyone here really love reading Lyotard? Not a lot of people. It's a real question. I'm asking if anyone here is actually someone who I could consider or considers himself someone who really knows Lyotard well. It's okay if the answer is no, because it is, he's not someone everyone's read. That's good. He's not someone I'm super fucking versed in comparison. So don't stress over that.
Was he a follower of Wittgenstein? I think he wrote a book called Just Gaming.
Just Gaming? Is it about Minecraft? I don't.
No.
Sorry, it was a bad joke.
I guess it has to do with maybe ethics and language.
You're starting to get into the realm of philosophy I am just not going to be able to say answers to. So this will be a journey for all of us, I think would be how I'd phrase that, if that makes sense. At the top level, really a lot of his work we might call, it gets called sort of postmodern theory. It's part of that sort of larger group of this sort of post-structuralist, postmodernism set up, really playing with how language and signification works. A lot of his stuff had to do with the general context that works within things. So he really did come from Saussure. Again, this is what I spent last week, a couple hours in the last week trying to figure out how he ties in right here. So he has other shit he wrote, but they're specifically talking about his book on signification. And this is where I think your line about games, he talked about language games. The idea that there are social and cultural contexts to words that shift and change their meaning, which I sort of just mentioned, the sort of as a semi-counter to what is being played or put forth by Purport or Yomslev. And there's a lot of stuff in there that we can get into, but it is in this direction, I think would be the easiest way to probably put it if I'm going to be messy, which is possible. Yeah, MSDXR, I also have the differend sitting up here. I also have like 2 or 3 other of his books. I don't know if they'll ever actually get fully read. I've gone through them bit by bit, and then I think I flit off to something else. I'm not really a big fan of his writing style. makes it tough to get through some of these. But we will continue our reading today, and then we will spend time actually breaking down as much as we can, because we also have another really fantastic writer being mentioned in this paragraph, Mallarmé, who's a stunningly brilliant prose poetic writer, which I do have a lot of reading on, but also we have Jack here who's read even more than me, more in depth even. So this will be fun. Let's do the paragraph, and then we'll try to break down what everyone's talking about. The extreme importance of J.F. Lyotard's recent book is due to its position as the first generalized critique of the signifier. In his most general proposition, in fact, he shows that the signifier is overtaken toward the outside by figurative images, just as it is overtaken toward the inside by the pure figures that compose it, or, more decisively, by the figural that comes to short-circuit the signifier's coded gaps, inserting itself between them, working under the conditions of identity of their elements. In language and in writing itself, sometimes the letters as breaks and shattered partial objects, sometimes the words as undivided flows, as non-decomposable blocks, or full bodies having a tonic value, constitute asignifying signs that deliver themselves over to the order of desire. Rushes of breath and cries. In particular, formal investigations concerning manual or printed writing change their meaning according to whether the characteristics of the letter and the qualities of the words are in service of the signifier, whose effects they express following exegetical rules, or whether, on the contrary, they break through this wall so as to set flux in motion, to establish breaks that overflow or rupture the sign's conditions of identity, that cause books within the book to flow and to disintegrate, entering into multiple configurations whose possibilities were already the object of the typographical exercises of Mallarmé, always passing underneath the signifier, filing through the wall, which again shows the death of writing is infinite so long as it arises and arrives from within. This is going to be a long fucking one. I'm going to actually pull up some. So the question would be, what is the book specifically they're referring to? Let's start with that. Because it's Discourse and Figure is the one I presume, but it may not be. What year? When was this produced? That's the question. The floor is open if anyone would like to begin making statements or pushing us forward. From the rest of this book, generally you're going to run into paragraphs like this with me. I have confidence in a great deal of the knowledge we've sort of had. We're in our third reading. I kind of remember what people have said before. All this stuff's great. We start getting to these points where we genuinely have really complex shit being talked about that I don't think there's good secondary sources on, and I think is worth us actually beating up and punching around and seeing what we come to. So please jump in, say hi, and let me know your thoughts. Probably. I'm not going to force anyone to, but please.
Can I offer something? Maybe,
Yes.
my take is that he's, Deleuze is following up on Yamsalev's, language system that critiques seems to critique the signifier, and that's what Lyotard is doing as well. So is he giving his book another example of this kind of critique of the signifier in writing, and a new kind of writing that's also includes Mallarmé would be another example of a critique of the signifier in writing.
The Mallarmé one I think might be a little easier, and Jack, do correct me if you disagree on this. I think with Mallarmé they're being very directed. Here, let me 2 seconds. So Mallarmé, you're gonna have to look at my camera for this one, by the way. I hope it works. We'll see. We'll find out. Mallarmé, fascinating writer. Blow of the dice will never abolish chance. Let me change the way that this is doing. Let me turn down the contrast, maybe. Yeah, that seems to work. Okay, so let's see. There. Blow of the dice will never abolish chance. So here's Mallarmé doing Mallarmé's thing. Let me enlarge my camera for the YouTubes, so that way they have that. I'm seeing it's all fucked up. It needs to be mirrored. Nope. There. Blow of the dice will never abolish chance. The way Mallarmé wrote literally is about abolishing general typography. What I mean is, this is a translation that's printed exactly in the dimensions and style that Mallarmé wrote the poem in the original French. Mallarmé did this a lot. There's this one I think is an exceptional version, but it's the placement of the lettering and the words. The master risen inferring of this inferno that like one menaces the one number that cannot hesitates body by the arm rather than gamble in manic bleached the game in the name of some waves. One, the typography and the placement of the letters is literally what I think they're talking about, because when they say, for example, let me shrink myself back down. The phrasing around Mallarmé, investigations concerning manual or printed writing change their meaning according to whether characteristics of the letters and qualities of the words are in service of the signifier, whose effects they express following exegetical rules. This would be like normal printing press. But there's like normal books that have like the big capital letter in the upper left at the beginning of the fucking chapter, and then the words go that way. Or whether, on the contrary, they break through this wall to set a flux in motion and establish breaks that overflow or rupture the sign's conditions of identity. The way that the words are literally placed on the page don't themselves sort of follow that standard left to right. And so there is, through its placement, and there's different words of different size that completely fucks with that too. Mallarmé did a whole bunch of different stuff in this, and all of it matters greatly. So for example, on this page, you can see chance is big. Over here on this side, you can see that there's like large, it's in the middle of the page. It's really interesting. But what's happening, again, is that it's breaking away from the idea of traditional signification, and instead the placement of the words has meaning itself. The size of the words has meaning itself. The relation of the placement has meaning itself, if all of that makes sense for what I'm saying. So when we talk about, like, in this specifically, the way that these things are placed, that cause books within the book to flux and disintegrate, entering into multiple configurations whose possibilities were already the object of the typographical exercises of Mallarmé. These things pass underneath the signifier, filing through the wall, showing the death of writing is infinite so long as it arises and arrives from within. I think this is what they're referring to, is in this specifically, how we look at and how we process the location of words and the placement of words affects signification by being underneath it, which is really the Mallarmé example, I think, is what they're driving at. The Lyotard example, I'm not skilled enough or well read enough, sadly, fully to be able to grasp that, but that's just generally my understanding of that, if that makes sense. Jack, I'm going to look to you. You know the Mallarmés. No?
Yeah, I mean, I've read the poem.
Because this isn't the only book Mallarmé does this, right?
I mean, as far as like that kind of technique goes, I mean, he doesn't do it in Prelude. His general, like his, I think it's called poésies in French, or
Poesis.
however you say that. I don't speak French, but poetries is, or poems is I think how it translates. But that's all a pretty standard poetic form. I think even like some of it's classic actually. Um, the only two texts I'm aware of that he really goes to that extent are the one in question and one he never finished, which is called The Book. I don't know if that was even in like I don't know if you could read that in 71 like that because he never finished it.
Yeah, it seems Lily brings up discourse figure. Let's pull up discourse figure. Let's see what we can do there. I'll pop the PDF in the chat. Please.
I just wanted to say that Mallarmé is someone who has been in poetry, in French poetry, and in a few types of poetry at a period where a lot of things were changing. He was mostly known for being a symbolist, so someone who participated in the French movement of poetry named after symbols themselves. Often using things like combining. Some of the symbolists used techniques like trying to combine senses to have an idea of what the world could be outside of what humans could like perceive. It's a very like it was very much inspired by Baudelaire. And yeah, Mallarmé is a very, very obscure one. Not as in he's not known, but as in hermetic almost. Some of his poetry is very hard to grasp. He takes on challenges like the fact that nothing only exists as a word. So his poetry is kind of specific. But yeah, the typographical seems to be more about the way in which, a bit like the Dada, would sometimes put words in different ways on the page instead of the words themselves being the poem. Anyways, that's my little side note. There's a lot about him on Wikipedia if you want a quick idea.
Fair enough. And for those who don't recognize Otterwaffle, if you're wanting to learn how to pronounce French, I am one of these people. We have actually a lot on the server. Otterwaffle happily hosts some time and spends patient hours with especially Americans trying to learn how to pronounce things correctly. So this was just calling out Otterwaffle. Thank you very much. That's all.
No problem.
All right. No one else. Leotard, anyone else want to jump in here? This is going to be a fun journey if you don't. Otherwise, we've got to spend some time reading other things. All right. Well, then we'll read a few things. We'll start with, I think the best is going to be heading right to the IEP, which I think is going to get through us and get into figure pretty quick. Discourse and figure, which we were just talking about. I posted the PDF. Leotard analyzes the limits of reason and representation through the terms of discursive and figural. Discursive is a term used for reason and representation. It's the rational system of representation by concepts that forms a system of oppositions. The figural is what exceeds rational representation. It appeals to sensual experience, emotions, and desires. Leotard uses the metaphors of flatness and depth to refer to discourse and figure, respectively. The opposition between discourse and figure is deconstructed, however, since to maintain it as an opposition would be to remain within the logic of discourse, and to retain discourse as primary. Lyotard introduces a distinction between opposition and difference to account for the differing ways in which the discursive and the figural function. Difference corresponds to figure. Distinction between discourse and figure itself is said to be one of difference rather than opposition. In opposition, two terms are rigidly opposed and quite distinct. In difference, the two terms are mutually implicated, yet ultimately irreconcilable. Difference is a disruptive force at the limits of discourse, indicating that no rational system of representation can ever be closed or complete, but is always opened up to forces that cannot enclose within itself. To me, this, my understanding of this flows pretty nicely with what we were just talking about Mallarmé as well. The idea that, and Deleuze even uses the language of depth when talking about the figural. If we have on the one side the sort of the elements of the reasonable, here is what the words say, and I'm able to understand them rationally through logical, sort of presumption of here's the words that are being used. And this is really only one part of things. The other part would be the figural, the things that exceed representation, which is what Deleuze and Guattari are really trying to get us at in the previous paragraph, and also how Mallarmé is trying to get us at these things. The placement of words, how they're collected, where they're collected, size of them in relation to each other, where they sit on the page, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These elements, the figural, that are more in depth, they're sensual, emotional, you might say intensive. These play within the book, within the writing, within the elements that we're sort of dealing with as asignifying elements that, again, pull back, give us other ways for desire to attach, places for desire to attach, and allows a completely different sort of way of grasping these things. And that's that line. In language and in writing itself, sometimes the letters as breaks, as shattered partial objects, sometimes the words as undivided flux, non-decomposable blocks or full bodies having a tonic value. All of these constitute asignifying signs that deliver themselves over to the order of desire, rushes of breath and cries. This is, again, talking about the totality of the writing that you're reading or that you're taking in, not just the words, that the placement of them, where they're at, the medium, these other things all come in and have a major impact, to say the least. That's how I get it. Anyone else have a different take or tactic or thought? Please let me know. I'm happily going to sit here for a moment. I am always ready to be awkwardly silent. Don't worry. Oh, yeah. We'll restart then, because I think rereading this is going to be important. When we talk about capitalist representation, one of the dangers of representation, we went through this in chapters 1 and 2, and a lot of 3, but mostly 1 and 2, is you could say seeing only the forest for the trees or seeing only the trees for the forest. One of the dangers of representation within capital is that we don't really grasp all the ways desire is impacted by various things. We don't really grasp it because we see the thing, we take it in as what we are taught it is, as representation sort of shows us, and we don't really critically look at all of these elements. They're trying to, and I think they do a very nice job as we make our way through, break down all of these parts, break down all of these elements significantly. So we end up in a place where they say, Lyotard, in fact, shows the signifier is overtaken towards the outside by figurative images, just as it is overtaken toward the inside by the pure figures that compose it, or more decisively, the figural that comes to short-circuit the signifier's coded gaps, inserting itself between them and working under the conditions of identity of their elements. If we take Mallarmé's work, Mallarmé is not alone in this. I don't even need to do that. Modern poetry takes a lot of cues from Mallarmé. And it's not just that, it's internet culture, meme internet culture, the same as well. Like this is how representation and writing and these things function within Capital without saying they do this, is that the figural short circuits the signifier's coded gaps. The signifier, the word, signifies X. But the context of it, the placement of it, the imagery of it, the things that are asignifying, things that don't in themselves necessarily mean anything partially. And we're talking about lots and lots of partially that's involved in every single word. Every little bit changes that meaning, fucks with that meaning, allows desire to play with it. And this thing, as he says, shows that signifier is overtaken towards the outside by figurative images, just as it is overtaken toward the inside by the pure figures that compose it, or by the figural, which short circuits the signifier's coded gaps. This whole thing they're talking about is about shifting our understanding of how we are reading, how everything that matters that we read is everything we're taking in. Getting back to partial objects, which they begin bringing up here again. If you go all the way back, section 1, part 1, really all of chapter 1. Partial objects are all the little bits. They're unidentified billions of parts of things. These are all part of our reading now. They're all part of our seeing art, reading books, reading newspaper, reading internet memes. You reading text on chat right now. It's locations. All of these things matter. All of these things come in. They are part of it. Desire flows through them, connects with them. These connect still with desire. All of this impacts. And that's the point of bringing up Lyotard, specifically for sure, the point of bringing up Mallarmé, and how Mallarmé was able to play with placement, to shift meaning, to shift how we read it, what the relationality is of the words, where they're located, how they're placed on the page, the size of them, the size of the lettering. And these things we don't cognize and go, yes, chance is larger, therefore this is not how reading works. We read. It just comes in. And they don't really signify anything, these changes, but there's stuff in them, the desire attaches. They're asignifying, but desire is still part of it. Does all that make sense? Because it's a pretty significant leap in how this shit works and how really signification operates. It's a big leap from the despotic, this push.
So is he kind of breaking down language in the same way that he broke down everything into a machine made of multiple parts? As in, language is like a whole thing made of tiny parts kind of connecting and disconnecting and becoming one meaning only because there's context that makes it make sense.
Yeah, all the things that we wouldn't... we talk about, like, for example, if we were to talk about Mallarmé, I would say, well, here are the words that are written in there. And we can do that. It's not the whole thing. There's a lot of stuff in there that really requires you to just take it in as such that I can't even get across. Oh, by the way, chance is larger by 75% over the other words. You're not going to go, oh, that's not how that works. There's a lot happening that's asignifying. And all of those asignifying elements are also part of this. And again, like you said, it's as they went through and they really talked through about how our unconscious is filled with these machines that are partial objects connecting, desire produced and made, and desire continuing on. Here we are with capitalism bringing us a linguistics that's actually revealing this, that's actually talking about all of these partial objects. And Yomslev's linguistics is that. It is about the partial objects that come together, and emergently the meaning comes from all of those bits. And so it's a lot, but yes, it's very much about even the written page is itself a multiplicity. Even though it seems static and dead, it is not the case. And there's some writers who do a lot of really amazing things with this. Tara Abados, I would say, one of the ones that sticks out with me. I literally can't recommend her book enough, or recommend it at all because I can't say the title. But she plays with words, how they're placed, how they're described, with strike-throughs and bolding and blacking out and underlining and italics in a book that is not poetry. It is a nonfiction book about the status of race in America. And it's amazing the work that's done through these asignifying elements that signify, but they don't really signify. They're not signifying, they're asignifying, but they sort of do, a kind of. And this kind of thing that has been played with, not just in poetics, but in not just in poetry, I should say, but sort of across many, many things, where all of these little things that sort of make up our experience of taking in this content shifts and change, and we don't really understand all of the schizzes, all of the point signs, all of the signs that are really involved in this, because, as they said in the previous paragraph, the signs have crossed a new threshold of deterritorialization. These figures lose minimum conditions of identity that defined the signifier itself. The signifier would be just the word chance. Oh, chance, it's the odds something will happen. But that doesn't even come close to getting across what is happening inside of Mallarmé's poem. And Hjelmslev's linguistics and Lyotard's critique give us that next level of understanding, where it's all these asignifying elements, the figural, the stuff underneath and behind, that's driving significant amounts of the meaning that we're taking in, of representation. The question from Kat is, would any of this tie in some way into nonsense? Oh my. Deleuze's logic of sense would just be a joy for you, I have a feeling. Yes. So without getting too derailed, Deleuze's logic of sense outlines sense and nonsense as the two components of how we come to make sense. And he means it quite literally, like we make sense as we read. The making sense of things, nonsense being a super necessary component. But he absolutely goes into that in the asignifying elements, the parts of it that are non-signifying, all of these things that really do drive sense and understanding. Here, he's bringing it through into a machinic unconscious, into a Hjelmslevian specifically, and guattarian semiotics. Guattari spent a lot of time on semiotics, and bringing it in to really refine it down to a tight point. So he's able to get it to being this base understanding we have of not just the written word, but general representation as a whole, which we'll come to in the next paragraph as we start talking about actual, what we might consider more art, rather than just the written word. So we'll get to that. So the answer is yes at a basic level. Yeah. So good question, Kat. And to read the rest of Kat's comment, because I think it is driving the point. Being here without, would any of this tie into nonsense? Because I half remember feeling like I knew what was going on with the Jabberwocky, even though most of the words were meaningless in a more literal way. Yes, that's very much the point. Nonsense is deeply, deeply important. You'll get the logic of sense. We're finally getting our reading of logic of sense on the channel, so you can jump over and join us as we make our way through that. Shortly, bit by bit, we're getting those out there. So I would recommend it. Any last comments or questions on this paragraph before we move forward to discussing Paul Klee? I'll leave it open for a second. It's a lot said.
I think what got me confused last time is that I it's hard to explain my thoughts when I think about that. Sorry. I think what got me confused last time is that most of the book, it seems like they are using purposefully some words that are not what we usually use to describe like people around us, society, or those kinds of concepts, talking about machines instead of people and stuff like that, and society and institutions and stuff. But in the case of language, he speaks directly about language. So my brain goes to concrete how the language works and how it works between people and stuff. Is he speaking really about language? Or is he speaking about something more global or something more larger as a concept?
Specifically here, he's talking about language. Now, on second and third reading through, or very soon, you'll see that they are literally talking about language here, linguistics. They're talking about how words work and how we understand representation when we take it in various ways. We're going to get into art in a second, which you might normally not talk about in linguistic sense, but they're going to bring in some of the things from the figural and sort of expand them across. They will be making a play that this is not a thing that like, oh, wow, look at how language works. I guess that's it. But instead, using language as a way for us to understand how the decoding process operates and how desire attaches to things, because they're going to be doing it again also with recoding and all of that as we get back into the economic side. So it's these two we're going to be playing with, and I don't think we'll make our way fully through until 311, which is the next section, which I think brings them together and talks a little bit more cleanly about that when we finally get to Oedipus. So for now, join the journey, and generally, I would say you're in the right spot, if that makes sense.
Okay, so he's talking about language, but it doesn't feel odd to me that it translates to talking about also like art and stuff. Maybe I'm gonna be wrong, but so far he's already gone beyond linguistics and language itself and more about communication as a whole. And since art is a way of communicating, it doesn't feel odd to me that we're going there. But I guess we'll see.
No, you're spot on. It's not odd so much that we're going there. It's much more that we're going to be making strides. It's going to be step by step. You'll see as we make our way through. But yeah, spot on.
Right.
We're having a larger discussion, but it is focused. It is focused right here on specifically language and communication and representation. So I guess we'll get to the next paragraph unless anyone horribly objects. Similarly, in the plastic arts, Similarly, in the plastic arts, there is the pure figural dimension formed by the active line and the multidimensional point, and on the other hand, the multiple configurations formed by the passive line and the surface it engenders, so as to reveal, as in Paul Klee, those intermundia that perhaps are only visible to children, madmen, and primitives. Or in dreams, in some very beautiful pages, Lyotard shows what is at work in dreams is not the signifier, but a figural dimension underneath, which gives rise to configurations of images that make use of words, making them flow and cutting them according to flux and points that are not linguistics and do not depend on the signifier or its regulated elements. Thus, Lyotard everywhere reverses the order of the signifier and the figure. It is not figures that depend on the signifier and its effects, but the signifying chain that depends on the figural effects, this chain itself being composed of asignifying signs, crushing the signifiers as well as the signifieds, treating words as things, fabricating new unities, creating from non-figurative figures configurations of images that form and then disintegrate. These constellations are like flux that imply the breaks affected by points, just as the points imply the fluxion of the material they cause to flux or leak. The soul unity without identity is that of the flux schiz, or the break flow. The pure figural element, the figure matrix, Lyotard correctly names desire, which carries us to the gates of schizophrenia as process. Actually answering your question, I think, Otter, pretty nicely there. So, yeah.
Thank you, Gilles Deleuze.
Yeah, we had someone on YouTube ask while I was rambling before, who's the one making the sense? And it's really, this is the fun stuff of logic of sense. We are talking about you as a subject, the royal you, all the parts, all the things taking it in, make sense of what you're taking in. The writer places things. Writer does that. The artist paints, creates a canvas, diagrams out the art, puts everything in its place. But you take it in and interact with the canvas as if it was sort of part of you. And the same with words, the same with anything else. So the process of making sense is a combination of all of those things together, the same way that you might say, I only have crude ways of talking about it because we usually only talk about things like this crudely, but you don't piss everywhere. You piss in a toilet or urinal, or maybe a sink if you're desperate. So what's making that? Well, that's what makes any of these things, what makes bodily excretions, what makes anything we do. It's us, but all of it, and also the things we're taking in, make these things. And sense is no different. Sense and all of these things are all produced by the en masse, at large us. And when I say at large, I mean, again, don't think about yourself as a singular, oh, I do this, I have a soul and it's inside of me and I'm singular. It's the collection of stuff that is you. Because it's a complex collection, to say the least. So Paul Klee, really worth going over for a moment or two, I think, in my opinion, because he had a very particular style, I think would be a nice way of putting it. I'm going to toss a few into Discord that I've really, I think, get across the line that they have here. The intermundia that perhaps visible only to children, madmen, and primitives, is talking about Klee and how Klee sort of, I don't know how to put it. I don't want to say broke down, but how Klee's art operated and worked is very much along the line of what they say. A pure figural dimension formed by the active line and the multidimensional point, and the multiple configurations formed by the passive line and the surface it engenders. This is him basically talking about what a painting is. What is philosophy? He goes very deep into what is art. Even though the book is called What is Philosophy, he does talk about what is art. And this figural dimension of things, the way that the artist places, how things on the canvas relate to each other, and how the elements interplay and dance. These things at large come together, and the line here is meant to be. They use the line. It's meant to be like a dig, like who the fuck understands this? This isn't representational of anything. There's no beautiful fruited bowl of fruit in a window. Why would you not want a bowl of fruit in your fucking window? What is this garbage? And instead, it's saying that this thing that Paul Klee does is it gets to something a little deeper. Deleuze will say and has said that it gets closer to what he would call in here like the desiring machines, to desire itself, but visible to children, madmen, and primitives is intended to be a dig. These are Paul Klee's pieces of art, Wag, and what are you looking at? You're looking at art. I'm not going to tell you specifically what any of them are. Generally, by the way, these are landscapes. I think would be the way to put it. So they're landscapes, and they're good. Paul Klee, not Poor Klee, sorry. Paul Klee. Paul, P-A-U-L, Klee. He has a very, very particular style. Once you've seen it once, you will see it, by the way, everywhere. Klee is one of those artists who's like prolifically ripped off. I think would be a good way to put it. His cat, for example, which I think is fucking great. Right there, that's his cat. Fucking love it. I love his faces. I love how he does this stuff. It's very unique. He is a fucking odd cat. And his work is very, very specifically Paul Klee. I fucking love his stuff. So, yeah. It's a man, actually. It's not his cat, but he's got a lot of art. It's fantastic. That just looks like this. He plays with a lot of things. I fucking love it. Yeah, it's a really unique style. But this thing that's happening that you're seeing there, when you're looking at Klee's work, you're seeing the figural dimension formed by, and you can see it, just look at it when I say this, the active line and the multidimensional point, and also multiple configurations, the entire thing, by passive lines and the surface it engenders. The surface that is engendered, created by looking at it through the passive line, the surface that is created. You see this image, and I can do it with any Paul Klee. We can just you can do this with almost any art. You can see what the background is, the foreground, the surface that is made, and what it's intended to be. If I were to show, here, we'll go with another one that's a cityscape. And I can say that because, how can I say that's a cityscape? This looks like a bunch of shapes that are just laid out. Well, no, it's not. There's the passive line that is on the surface it engenders with multiple configurations that we're able to see on it, that actually these are buildings. There's actually depth to this image as flat as it is. And I can point out the tops of buildings. And you can see them. And you can see the skyscrapers. And you can also see, if I were to say, but actually there's a big chunk of the piece that's missing because it's actually the sky and it's the background and the moon. Like, how? It's just like it ain't there. It isn't. It's not there. That's not how this works. It's not there, but it is completely there. So the moon, the missing, all of these things, this is the figural. It's a sun. I thought it was a nighttime shot. Fuck. I thought it was nighttime. Doesn't matter. It does not matter. Either way. See, this is, I'm just going to say, this is the daytime shot. God damn it. See, this is the daytime photograph. The daytime photograph. Night or evening. I love, this is why Paul Klee is such a great example for Deleuze when we're talking about this stuff. Because the way that sort of art plays within how he sees art and his semiotics works kind of across. And Paul Klee is such a great example. And you can look, when you look at it, the active line and multidimensional point, the definition of the canvas, the placement, the depth, all of these things are instantly there, but also the passive line and the surface engendered. And so now we see, and now you understand when you look at this, the line, intermundia visible only to children, madmen, and primitives, which is a great line about it that's actually kind of positive. It's actually positive to Deleuze, and to me, I adore this. Children, by the way, absolutely love Klee. One, it feels achievable to them when you say that this is an all-time famous artist, but it also, they don't spend the time that we do. They take it in a little differently. It's pretty amazing. The second half of this paragraph goes into what I think is going to be like dreams is a fascinating conversation. Lyotard put forward this idea, and Deleuze runs with it, and it's one I personally really like as well. So I'm biased, but the way Lyotard talks about dreams is that dreams aren't actually made of representations and things themselves. It's instead this dimension underneath, the figural, that dreams are made of. And if you think about all of the figural elements, like just think of a big vat of them, and this is what your inside of your head. and they're colliding and moving around, and through them, you make sense of things. You actually make sense through the figural. And this is not linguistic. These things don't necessarily connect in a way that we would consider generally sensible. But instead, that they don't depend on any of these elements. They don't depend on a signifier. And this is what dreams are. This chain itself that composes asignifying signs. This I really like as an idea and as a thing. But it's, again, getting at what is the figural? What is the elements underneath? How do these things work? How are they set up? I adore this as a thing. So it's a really a solid discussion about art, basically really tight and really simple. I like it.
I was wondering if there's a link between the way he speaks about dreams and the way he speaks about schizophrenia.
Yes. I don't want to skip too far ahead, but yeah, I mean
That's coming up, all right.
Well, it's you can kind of get the idea from it the way at the very end here when we're talking about dreams and we're talking about Lyotard and how he reverses the order of the signifier and the figure. It's not because, and this is, he doesn't mean this just for schizophrenics. He doesn't mean this, and again, schizophrenics, I shouldn't even say. He doesn't mean this for what he calls a schizophrenic, which includes autism and a lot of other mental conditions. It means deeply disturbed mental conditions. And there's a huge bath of that we can go through. But it's talking through specifically reversing the order of the signifier and the figure. It's not figures that depend on the signifier. It isn't that we look at this Klee image and we see his picture and we go, oh, these things, that's because we already know what a city is. The signifier of buildings and sun and sky, that lets us do art. No. It's actually the opposite. It's that those significations require and rely on the figural and its effects. The signifying chain depends on figural effects. The chain itself being composed of asignifying signs, crushing signifiers and signifies, treating words as things, fabricating new unities, creating from non-figurative figures configurations of images that form and disintegrate. This is a shift in understanding how these things sort of interplay. And I think with that, I have to go to the next paragraph. I apologize, but we're just going to jump forward because it goes right into it. What explains the reader's impression that Lyotard is continually arresting the process and steering the schizes toward shores he has so recently left behind, toward coded or over-coded territories, spaces, and structures, to which they bring only transgressions, disorders, and deformations that are secondary in spite of everything, instead of forming and transporting further the desiring machines that are in opposition to the structures and the intensities that are in opposition to the spaces? The explanation is that despite his attempt at linking desire to a fundamental yes, Lyotard reintroduces lack and absence into desire, maintains desire under a law of castration at the risk of restoring the entire signifier along with the law, and discovers the matrix of the figure in fantasy, the simple fantasy that comes to veil desiring production, the whole of desire as effective production. But at least for an instant, the mortgage of the signifier was raised, that enormous archaism that causes so many of us to groan and bow under its weight, that others use to establish a new terrorism, diverting Lacan's imperial discourse into a university discourse characterized by a pure scientificity, that scientificity perfectly suited for resupplying our neuroses, for strangling the process once again and overcoding Oedipus with castration, while chaining us to the current structural functions of a vanished archaic despot. For it is certain that even and especially in their manifestations of extreme force, neither capitalism nor revolution nor schizophrenia follows the paths of the signifier. There's going to be a lot to get through here. There's going to be a lot to get through there. It's going to be a lot. Lyotard doesn't reintroduce lack. This is one of those things that you run into a lot. Foucault, for example, who wrote a terrible foreword to this book, also wrote about how he never really got it because he just can't get away from lack being that thing. What, Jack? What did I say?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's terrible forward.
Oh, well, I think so. I do. But I've grown to hate it over time. I probably shouldn't say that. That's just a personal opinion. Fair enough.
That's all right. I'm happy to disagree.
Yeah, fair enough. But for Foucault, who did write the foreword, he couldn't get away from the idea that lack is built into this. And the way that it's set up, the way that it's placed, the way that desire operates, lack is necessarily part of this. And as such, these elements that we're talking about here, these things that drive, the things that desire attaches to, these asignifying signs, at their base, ultimately just transgress. They don't create meaning. They're not meaning itself. They're not this larger thing. No, it can't be. Because desire necessarily needs to be castrated and sublimated before it can become something that's usable, before it can be something bigger, before it can be something important. And this, Foucault does, and Lyotard does. They talk about it elsewhere. I really need to finish reading the entire book. I need to do some Lyotard. It becomes this challenge where it's like there are so many books out there to read, and it's like, oh, they've talked about this, summarized, shit on it, said bad. So do I? It's like you get a little bit into it, and it's like, oh, I don't want to. It's I need to do that. I'm gonna see if Eldoran's on. Eldoran's done some Lyotard. Hey, you know Lyotard. See if we can get Eldoran to join. And we've been in a mood so ever since we did the AI art discussion 2 weeks ago. We've been talking through sort of how art comes to be and how it operates, and AI art is very much playing with the same things. Like quite literally, it fits very much what they're talking about, where somehow these mass of figures, the figurative, which is all that AI doesn't know anything, has no context, it has no understanding or representation, it has no meaning in anything. It just does not know what is in an image at all. There's no cognition. Happy to have anyone disagree with me on that, but you're fucking wrong. So instead, when we see an image that AI's made that is a thing, it is purely figural, creating representation. It's astonishing. And it is this really interesting interplay because it's purely figural. There's no signification happening. They're all asignifying signs that make their way in. And so how does this operate? How does this play? How do these things show in? Well, as they're talking about here, the asignifying signs, the figural actually are the thing that supports the signifiers. They are, what is the phrasing? It is not the figures who depend on signifier and its effects, but the signifying chain that depends on figural effects. This chain itself being composed of asignifying signs. Like a dream, the AI does this type of thing, plays in this same kind of thing, and reveals to us at the base layer some of these things and how they operate. So with Lyotard, he spends his book coming right up to the edge to talk about how desire and all of these elements really are pushing through, connecting, and partial objects connecting and disconnecting, like this massively complex, infinitely happening, constantly imminent process of the production of sense and meaning. But no, wait, we can't allow that. So he pulls back. He reintroduces lack and absence and desire. He retains this law of castration at the risk of restoring the entire signifier along with the law. and discovers the matrix of the figure in fantasy, a simple fantasy that comes to veil desiring production, the whole of desire as effective production. But that's fine, they say. But that's okay. That's what he does. But for an instant, the mortgage of the signifier was raised. The signifier itself, they call this enormous archaism. The idea that a word has a meaning as we take it in comes from the way that the state operated, comes from the way the despotic operated, comes from the way this thing happened under the despotic signifier. This is how we got that. We didn't have that before. This is not like natural state human beings. It's a thing that grew over time and built, and then lo and behold, we've brought it back in, despite having lots of good ways around it, I think I would say. And we suddenly move Lacan's, as they call it, imperial, this is Guattari straight up, diverting Lacan's imperial discourse, master signifier, etc., into a university discourse characterized by a pure scientificity, which is not really about having a single meaning, a university discourse. One sec, I want to make sure I get this right, because Lacan makes me insane. One sec, I want to make sure I get it. Because this has to do with hegemony of knowledge, and it's a whole thing, and it sucks. It's good. I shouldn't say it sucks. Lacan is incredibly complex to sort of make your way through. So we have the discourse of the university deals with the hegemony of knowledge. So we move from Lacan's master signifier, where we have the subject basically becomes positioned within the master's truth. And he means master. He means this very explicitly. They're using it explicitly too. The king, the despot, the God, whatever it may be, God's word, king's word, whatever it is, passes knowledge downwards. So we all have to interpret and understand what God intends or the king intends. Discourse of the university is, think of it as more of a distributed master class, not the internet course, but like a class of philosopher kings. So we basically have knowledge handed down to the institute. The institute legitimizes this truth. As such, you sort of have this really weird interaction where the truth can be whatever authority says it is, which doesn't make it. Master is at least one dude. Authority is like this dispersed, odd hegemony, as he talks about it. And so you have a really awful, castrated experience of trying to understand how something works or what something means. This is, if you've ever read Kafka, this is the bureaucracy of knowledge kind of thing. This is that kind of setup. And this is the move. We take the imperial discourse into a university discourse characterized by a pure scientificity. We can do tests. We can understand what things are at. We can argue about all of these things. And then some group on high, you're free to point out who they are. I don't think they exist, but, we generally agree that these people say so. This says so. This resupplies our neurosis, a hardline meaning, our paranoiac response that, yes, this means that. It has to mean that because we all agree it means that, don't we? And at the same time chaining us to the current structural functions of a vanished despot. The master signifier hides inside of this process. For it is certain that even and especially in their manifestations of force, neither capitalism nor revolution nor schizophrenia follows paths of the signifier. This thing has been added to it. Capitalism doesn't follow the signifier. Capitalism disintegrates. Revolution doesn't follow the signifier. It's about subverting it. It breaks it down. It destroys. And schizophrenia, the process of the schiz, also breaks this down. It also does not follow the path of the signifier. So what does? Is kind of that they're trying to bring back the understanding of what is doing that and why, and how these things again interact. And this is getting back to the decoding, the deterritorialized flux within capital, how capital changes production by decoding Recoding follows. This is not a pro-capitalist argument. This is just understanding how the process operates. And this setup putting us in a place is kind of the big deal. That was a lot. That was a lot. Robin asked in YouTube, we did 2 hours, Eldron and I did 2 hours talking through how AI art works. It's in our back catalog. If you go check out the YouTube page, you'll be able to find it. I'm going to be re-editing and uploading it, but you can find it there. I'm not going to get into it here because I will not shut up, and no one wants that because we're here about AO. Lily says, don't they say create something new somewhere? Everywhere, I think, they talk about it. The idea of creating something new, though, this is the point for them. What does it mean to create something new? And that's because that itself is its own. Boris Groys has a wonderful book called On the New that I highly recommend, Groys. I don't think I have a PDF of that one. No. I've really started to like a lot of Groys' work, getting more and more into it. But On the New, wonderful book that goes into sort of what it means to do new and how that works and how it's not just novel. It's not about novel. It's not about kitschy. It's not about gimmicky. What new means and how it operates. Back to this, though. What we've talked about now, the A signifying signs, the figurative, all of the elements of things that we take in, it's no longer just the word. It's no longer before that even the graphism or the odd interconnectedness of the voice, the eye, and the graphism. It's not just this signifier, signified, master signifier sort of word and how we take it in. Now we're at a place, because of how capitalism is working, it's breaking down everything to the deeply most fundamental parts and using those parts. Desire freely connecting to them. Well, I should preface that. Desire being able to freely connect to them. But there's other things happening here because it's the thing capitalism does to decode. But is that everything? Is that everything? No. The answer is no. Before we move to the next bit, is there any comments, questions, anything here for people, please?
You called me.
Oh my God! Hello, Eldoran. Perfect. Hello. You know Leotard.
To an extent, yeah.
To an extent. Can you describe how Leotard is doing the following? Leotard is continually arresting the process, steering skizzes towards shores he had so recently left behind. They're talking here about Leotard's work in breaking down the figural from the discursive, and how Leotard really brought out the figural, all these asignifying elements. Yet somehow, rather than allowing desire to take its course, he castrated the process and moved us back towards really what capitalism, towards the Oedipal, towards castration by stifling desire. Do you know what they're speaking of specifically there?
Yeah. So in his book, Discourse Figure, Leotard sort of tries to understand the relation between the discourse and figure, discourse and image, right? And he says there is this, because figure, basically, we can understand it as image. And so he tried to understand the way in which these two function, right? In which perception and thought basically work, right? And he comes to the conclusion, much like Deleuze, that that thought is trapped in a sort of an image, right? And I haven't talked about this in a while. And so he tries to understand. So he tries to sort of wrest it away from that. And in response to someone like Adorno, how we read negative dialectics, and Adorno has this notion of negative dialectic that can't ever be sublimated, right? Lyotard is concerned with the negative there, and he's sort of like, that doesn't really work. He wants to sort of rescue thought from this negativity. So he theorizes. So between the notion of the discourse or thought and figure, he introduces the notion of the figural, right? And figural is this sort of difference, this undecidedness between the two, which lets one sort of analyze sort of the immanent development of image and thought from themselves. So he has these sort of these weird like steps where he goes from what he calls image figure, which is a way of sort of, it's basically representation, right, to form figure, which is basically just formal aspects of art and thought and discourse that sort of organize it from within. So if you think of the way that any form functions, right? So even the form of a philosophical discourse, it has this organizing mode, right? And then he goes to what he calls matrix figure, and so the figural is this sort of relation between these two notions, these notions of figure, and matrix figure. And I think Deleuze and Guattari even reference it, if I'm not wrong, in the book. Matrix figure is this unconscious sort of pre-perceptive
purely figural
area.
The purely figural.
Purely figural, which sort of structures the structuring itself, right? But what Lyotard does, Lyotard is not as radical as Deleuze and Guattari, and he understands it as a notion of through the Lacanian notion of fantasy, right? Which is something like that Zizek does later as well. And fantasy, I mean, to just state it broadly, and I'm sorry if I say anything wrong. It is quite late here. Fantasy is that thing which sort of allows a specific type of civilization itself within our society, right? Sort of, it sort of structures our enjoyment as well. And there's this, Zizek has this great example of like, there's a story of like, there's a villa in the hills, right? And a guy comes to a village, and so I'm paraphrasing this badly. A guy comes to the village, and like everybody keeps telling about like the great funs they had with this, like, I think it's a girl in the villa, right? Like, and how like how everybody was like enjoying, like everybody I think had sex with her or enjoying her, right? And it's this like folk story that's just everywhere in this village. And the guy and this is like a source of their enjoyment, this retelling. And the guy goes to the villa and figures out, oh, there is no woman, there's nobody there. So he comes back to them and he tells them that nobody's there. And they kill him because he uncovered a fantasy that's beyond their enjoyment, right? This is what Lyotard sort of means as well. It's this ability, this structuring, which, allows our libidinal sort of things to even like connect properly. Because what Lyotard ultimately wants to do in his discourse figure text is to move away from phenomenology, or like help phenomenology through the notion of psychoanalysis, especially Lacanian psychoanalysis. And then Deleuze and Guattari sort of don't like that, because this notion of fantasy is still, like trapped desire, basically. And I think they understand, and if you could correct me, they understand that Lyotard could not really theorize desire away from Lacan, even if he tried to get away from the image of thought. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean we just finished reading the couple paragraphs on Lyotard they had, where they talk about how he correctly names desire, the figure matrix, as that which carries us to the gates of schizophrenia's process. However, Lyotard reintroduces lack and absence into desire, maintains desire under law of castration, at the risk of restoring the entire signifier along with it, and discovers the matrix of the figure in fantasy, dreams, and others. So
yeah.
Good.
Fantasy, like, I think Lyotard uses the word primary fantasy, which is an Lacanian term. And so Lyotard is a complex figure. He later disavows that and moves more toward Deleuze. And then he sort of goes back later, even like, and then he's like, he has this weird Adornianisms, and reintroduces the notion of lack through his aesthetics of the sublime. But yeah, that's basically it. Did that help anyone?
I mean, helping is relative. The point is to go over it from another perspective, and it's exactly what we needed. Because Ms. Dixer and I were laughing how we both have like the same fucking book behind us from Lyotard that like I think I've opened and read 4 pages and then stopped.
Which book is it?
I'm not going to talk to you about how depressing my life is and how I don't read shit I need to read. I'm not going to be that awful.
No, I'm just like, if you tell me the book, I know like how I probably can understand why you would drop it after 4 pages. If it's like The Different, I dropped it, and I can't.
Hey, look at you! Yeah, it's The Different.
Yeah, it's a horrible book that's impossible to read.
It's fantastic that that's what you guessed, because that is just fucking accurate. Is the reality?
Yeah,
that is.
I know. Lyotard is a proper asshole with that book.
Well, his writing is just not great.
I have one of the professors who studied with Lyotard, right? I mean, under Lyotard, had a couple of seminars, and he asked Lyotard directly, "Hey, why the fuck did you write this like this?" And Lyotard had this like French smirk, and he was like, "Well, I wanted to piss people off, you know." So I guess he's succeeding.
Having read enough of his works, I believe that story wholly.
Yeah,
it's not.
He's the worst of the French.
He's just not fun to read, and it's very frustrating because he's got stuff he's clearly wanting to say that's important, but Jesus Christ. Okay, good. That works for me. Excellent.
So if anyone here wants to read Lyotard, that's not a complete fucking slog and headache. Lessons on the Dialectic of Sublime it's a short just reading of Kant through his eyes. You will learn a lot about Lyotard. It's great, and it's simple. That's like not simple, but like it doesn't have the Lyotardisms.
I posted a discourse figure because it's the one that's most important to this, and it's tolerable.
Yeah, okay, it's his thesis. Like even like different repetitions still had, it's still normal.
Yeah.
What's in academic standards?
Excellent.
Later shit is just bad and weird. All right.
Excellent. Thank you. That's all.
Now.
Thank you very much for the help. All
Bye-bye.
right. Always good to have. This is one of the reasons I like the DGQC is I get to abuse random mentions and go, hey, get the fuck in here and explain this to me. And you can too. Join the DGQC discourse. Discourse. I've got Lyotard on the brain. And that's partially a slur. Got to be careful there. Don't want to be ableist. The setup overall for discord.gg/DGQC. Come join us anytime. We are here every week doing this. I will do this forever. But we have a lot of other readings that are fantastic, that are going on literally every day. I think now we have 1 or 2 readings. And we have a lot of other activities going on in writings and a lot of fun stuff. It's fantastic. Yeah, Eldrin. I'm a Lyotard just before going to bed was not what I expected. Really? How long have you been on the server? Like, really?
You know that like this is the first time Lyotard has come up in a reading with me. He's generally ignored for a good reason.
Yeah, that's it's one of those things. I don't know. It's one of those things. I remember early on we had the first reading through is when I picked up all my Lyotard books and I read Discourse and Figure. I think I read most of it, part of it, and then I've hated it. And then I got all the rest, and they've been sitting on my shelf ever since. Because it's every year, and every year we come to this, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go read Lyotard. And then I open it and I go, oh, yeah, that's why I didn't fucking do this before. That's why. Oh, that's why. And I try, but fuck. It's a lot. So I've got monads, monadology to go through in Leibniz. And Leibniz is an easier read and a better read. So there you go. That's my review of Lyotard's books. Because Leibniz is not that good for read.
No, Leibniz is awful as well, but
at least it's interesting.
Leibniz could be read. Yeah. Better writer than Lyotard.
Better writer than Lyotard. Also more, I don't want to say insane's the wrong word, but he's not trying so fucking hard. Lyotard, it's painful. All right, we'll stop there. We'll move forward. I don't have to pronounce the D at the end. It's Lyotard. Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, a lot of words. The last few letters you don't have to pronounce them in French. Lyotard. Just so you know.
Well, see, there you go. Though. See now, though, you have to pronounce it with the French R.
Or you can say Lyotard.
Lyotard.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pick up and let's go read some Lyotard. I know that doesn't work. I think it depends on the accent. Lyotard.
Yeah.
Lyotard. I think I'm going to continue saying with the D because, man, it sounds good when you say it though. Lyotard. See, it's
exactly.
It's in French, by the way. Everything sounds better with a French accent. It's one of those weird things about language.
Or if you prefer doing the Spanish, or it works as well.
Lyotard. Yeah, okay, I can see that. But Lyotard in English sounds funny to me. That's fair. Good note. All right. With that, though, we're going to move to the next paragraph because we got half hour left. This is going to be the end of today's reading is going to be this paragraph. There is so much here. And next week, just so you know, is going to be the answer to the question asked here. So this first paragraph is literally constructing the question we're going to answer next week. So it's, a lot. So we begin. Civilization is defined by the decoding and the deterritorialization of flux in capitalist production. Any method will do for ensuring this universal decoding. The privatization brought to bear on property, goods, and the means of production, but also on the organs of private man himself. The abstraction of monetary qualities, but also the abstraction of quantity of labor, the limitless nature of the relationship between capital and labor capacity, and between the flux of financing and the flux of incomes or means of payment. The scientific and technical form, assumed by flux of code themselves. The formation of floating configurations starting from lines and points without a discernible identity. The route taken by the decoded flux is traced by recent monetary history. Now follow along. The role of the dollar, short-term migrating capital, the floating of currencies, the new means of financing and credit, the special drawing rights, the new form of crises and speculations. Our societies exhibit a marked taste for all codes foreign or exotic. But this taste is destructive and morbid. Well, decoding doubtless means understanding and translating a code. It also means destroying the code as such, assigning it an archaic, folkloric, or residual function, which makes of psychoanalysis and ethnology two disciplines highly regarded in our modern societies. Yet, it would be a serious error to consider the capitalist flux and the schizophrenic flux as identical under the general theme of a decoding of the flux of desire. Their affinity is great, to be sure. Everywhere capitalism sets in motion schizoflux that animate our arts and our sciences, just as they congeal into the production of our own sick, the schizophrenics. We have seen that the relationship of schizophrenia to capitalism went far beyond problems of modes of living, environment, ideology, etc., and that it should be examined at the deepest level of one and the same economy, one and the same production process. Our society produces schizos the same way it produces Prel shampoo or Ford cars, the only difference being the schizos are not saleable. How then does one explain the fact that capitalist production is constantly arresting the schizophrenic process and transforming the subject of the process into a confined clinical entity, as though it saw in this process the image of its own death coming from within? Why does it make the schizophrenic into a sick person, not only nominally, but in reality? Why does it confine its madmen and madwomen instead of seeing in them its own heroes and heroines, its own fulfillment? And where it can no longer recognize the figure of a simple illness, why does it keep its artists and even its scientists under such close surveillance, as though they risked unleashing flux that would be dangerous for capitalist production and charged with revolutionary potential, so long as these flux are not co-opted or absorbed by the laws of the market? Why does it form in turn a gigantic machine for social repression, psychic repression, aimed at what nevertheless constitutes its own reality, the decoded flux? Yes, Alderan, I correct flows to flux on the fly because it's important, and I will not stop. This is going to be fun because one of the really difficult things to parse, let's say you come out the other side of this reading, or even just today, and you go talk to Deleuzians, quote unquote. They will talk about how wonderful capitalist decoding is and how it frees desire and how it's the same thing as desire. So let's start with a line here that's real important. The route taken by the decoded flux is traced by recent monetary history, blah, 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 blah. Yet it would be a serious error to consider the capitalist flux and the schizophrenic flux as identical under the general theme of a decoding of the flux of desire. Really important here. It's really important shit. It's in this paragraph, in these questions that are being asked. That's the thing that they're really trying to parse apart. Why is this different? Why are they not the same thing? But they're not. So fucking right off the bat, they're not. Capitalism is not desire freed at all. Capitalism and the decoding of desire isn't schizophrenic flux. It is not the schiz. It is not freely flowing desire. It operates differently. It works differently. It's utilizing this, and they seem very similar, but they are different. So let's talk for a second about capitalist decoding again. The deterritorialization of flux. They talk about, and I kind of like the sort of conversation they have about exotic flux, codes foreign or exotic. Let's talk about how this even happens today. The woo community, which is my derisive term for ascientific weirdos who believe that the sun inside of shining the sun in their butthole doesn't make them Judge Schreber, but instead heals them because that's where the sun is supposed to go. This is a real fucking thing. People are like this. Or oxygenarians who believe that they only need all of their nutrients from breathing oxygen. There's a weird thing happening in all of these that if you look at where their origin is, you find that a lot of it starts from this codes, foreign and exotic. They see overseas people. They see people from uncontacted tribes or lesser known tribes or smaller tribes of origin that don't seem like they've been deeply co-opted by capital. They're wrong. But they see this. They see these codes of how these people live. And this is cool because they have codes and we want those codes. I feel this pull. I think most people feel this pull. The pull towards these codes is, oh, I'd love, this means something. The early parts of this book, when I first read it, and I'm not alone in this, Dogon eggs, the twins, all the stories of the Dogons that Grial went through and researched, that Godelier also did. You hear about these things, you're like, Jesus, these things mean this? I'd love to see that, to see this piece. I'd love to have a sculpture, a door, a this, a that. There's all these things that you can have that it's the codes. I'm bringing the codes. I want the codes. We like this, but this taste we have for them itself is actually fascinating, because by ingesting the codes, because we are digesting them, by ingesting them, we're breaking them apart. We're removing them from their placement inside of the very specialized system of codes, breaking them down and placing them specifically in this folkloric way of looking at it. And you can see this a lot in these Wu communities, where they talk about the way people used to do things, how this used to work, how the stories, the archaic folkloric or residual function, this way things used to work. People used to believe in this. They used to talk about this, the codes of old. We love this, but we've broken them down. So we've placed them in this very particular space. And we do that because as the codes are broken down, we strive for more. This is the beast. Feeding the beast is these codes. We love these fucking codes. We really want these codes. So we can break them down, and there's no discernible identity. This is scary. To not have a discernible identity, not to be connected or codified. This is kind of weird, especially, we'll get to like the full reason why, but this feels weird. It's an uncertain future, an uncertain past, an uncertain placement. We don't see how we're connected socially. We don't have that. So the codes of old, even monarchist, despotic, even way long ago, the anarcho-commune Earth, these codes seem like they would give us comfort. But we destroy them by taking them in. We give them more. I have a fantastic example of this. I love odd little things. This is a dragon egg. If you can see this, it's also called dinosaur egg salt. One place in the world this is still done, but for a long time, salt was literally the most important thing in the world. The salary. The term we get for paid is because the Romans paid in salt, because salt was used to cure meat, store food, keep things good, added flavor to foods, like all kinds of great stuff. Salt's great. So this is a very ancient way of doing salt. They fill these little pots that are like this. They fill it with salt water, and then they boil. The pots boil until the salt basically hardens. Water boils off. They add more and more and more until ultimately the pot shatters. And you get this, you're not seeing it on my video? Oh, that's because I'm not sharing. God, I'm terrible. I'm an awful human being for not sharing this in, let's see if I can share my video screen. Nope. That's not working. We'll see if one of these is working so you can see it. Otherwise, I'll post a picture of it in chat. I'll have to post a picture of it in chat. I don't have a good, oh no, I froze my video up. I'm terrible. One sec. Activate. Come on. Boom. All right. Let me find a picture of it for my poor denizens of the DGQC who can't see it. Dinosaur egg salt. Anti-Oedipus is the name. Here. Anti-Oedipus. It's this really odd way of making salt. It doesn't matter. This is commoditized now, by the way. This is fucking 100% commoditized. Like, this is not purely part of that old system. I like to say it is, and we like to have that in our marketing fucking materials, but I bought it from a company that's in San Francisco that handles the importing and exporting of these from the Bosal region. That's how this works. But, do you see this cool salt? Because it has the old codes around it. The folklore, the stories. These are awesome for me. They just feel good. I feel like I'm doing a thing. I feel like I'm part of a thing. The folklore, the setup. And this is why psychoanalysis, they say here, but I would even say we have larger than that, or ethnology. These two things are highly regarded in societies. But we should not consider the way that the capitalist decoding and schizophrenic decoding work as being the same. They're not. They have similar images. They seem like almost a trace of each other, almost. And their affinity is great. Everywhere capitalism sets in motion schizoflux that animate our arts and our sciences, our being in quotes there, just as they congeal into the production of our own sick, the schizophrenics. Our own sick. They want very, very carefully to be talking about this. And everyone who reads this fucking book, I yell at them. They really, 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 really need to. Schizophrenia and the schizophrenics, first, does not mean going schizo, having multiple personalities, all of this. Schizophrenia as a whole, at the time they were writing this, was actually primarily what we would call autism, which is going to fuck up a lot of people's understanding of this book when you start talking about it. And it included schizophrenia generally, sure. But it was a big umbrella tag. We don't even really talk about schizophrenia in that sense even anymore. Like today, clinically, it's completely different. At the time of this, though, what it was people who, the way that they, and for Deleuze and Guattari did a lot more writing on this. I highly suggest reading his books on Debord and the other works he did on his clinical work. The way people process information and how they connect it is the point. This encompassed a lot of things. Autism, automatism, which they had as a previous word for this, all the way through to what we would call multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. Sure, less so. This is very much about that. But all of these together, we need to think less of these people as, oh, look, these people are that. No, society made this. This is what society made. We produced them as much as this Tibuak was produced. It's a process through all of us that produced these people. We produced our own sick, the schizophrenics. We've seen that the relationship of schizophrenia to capitalism went far beyond the problems of modes of living, environment, and ideology. This isn't this area, this place, these people. No. And it needs to be examined at the deepest level of one and the same economy and the production process. This is the way things are made. As a whole, the way things are made, including people. Our society produces schizos the same way it produces Prel or Ford cars. The only difference being schizos aren't for sale. It's a fucking great line, and again, very important to the reading of the book. The production of people is important. The production of how this operates, how people are made, is one and the same as the whole thing. Otter Waffle does have a great note. Earlier when we were talking about the taste for these codes, the translator, again, I fucking hate this translation so much. This taste of codes is destructive and morbid. Morbid is technically sort of a correct translation. It's terrible because the original is destructif et mutoire, deathly, of death. Murderous, you could say, causing death. It's not morbid. Morbid kind of is the other side of death. It's the watching of death or the that kind of thing. This is mortuaire is like the causing of death. If I'm translating that correctly, let me know.
I don't think it's the causing of death, but more like about death, like mortuary as in a funerary house or whatever. Like it's about death in general.
It's about death.
But the word vif.
Well, that's wait, real quick. So
you got like the. Anyways.
No. So then, actually, that makes it actually a lot more interesting. So if it's destructive and mortuaire, if it's more of death, morbid is still fucking really a wrong translation for that then. But death is this really interesting thing within this book, but also within a lot of other Deleuze's writings, where he talks about death as being this sort of particular actualization of things where it's like there's a creation of a staticness to the thing. So to say another way, these codes, our desire for them, codes for an exotic, is destructive and incasting, where it destroys and then basically recodes and hardlines them. It kills it. It's an interesting setup. Yeah, I love that shit. We'll annoy afterwards. I want to keep going. So capitalist production produces schizophrenia, produces the people affected by these various afflictions, which again includes autism, which is a significant thing we talk about today. We don't put them in asylums anymore. We have programs. We have lots of great work being done on children who have autism and how to treat adults with it. There's a lot of work being done sort of to understand it. Things have changed a little bit since then, but not in this sense. At the grand level, society produces these people, produces us in our mental normativity or non-normativity. We are produced just like everything else. So the question would be, why, like, how does capitalist production constantly arrest this process, transforming the subject of the process into a confined clinical entity from within? Why does it make the schizophrenic into a sick person, not only nominally, but in reality, not only in terms of the way that they sort of exist, but also at large? Why do we consider them sick? Why is this not just how people are? And my favorite is this last bit. Why are these people not the heroes? Like, why does it confine them and hide them? And we're not that improved in comparison. We don't have asylums in the same way, but we have a couple autistic older kids on our block. They're not let out of the house. It's kind of a horrifying thing to consider. But why are they, given that they are this absolute and total deterritorialized person, why are they not the hero of capitalism? Why is it we shun and we hide them and we put them in corners? And where it can no longer recognize the figure of a simple illness, capitalism can't. Why does it keep its artists and scientists under close surveillance, as though they may be risked unleashing flux that would be dangerous for capitalist production and charged with revolutionary potential, so long as these flux are not co-opted or absorbed by the market? Why does it form in turn a gigantic machine for social repression and psychic repression aimed at what nevertheless constitutes its own reality, the decoded flux? What in capitalism is enacting the thing and kind of strangling the thing that it supposedly itself is creating, that it clearly is doing? It's decoding. Why is decoding not the thing to be celebrated? Why is the decoded person, the schizophrenic subject, the considered a victim, an illness considered, oh, put it over there? Why is this the case? What are we doing here? This is the thrust of the question underneath all of this. As we've gotten through this section talking about capitalist representation, we've had what I would say the good side of things. This is the part people really like talking about, the decoding of meaning, the decoding of stuff. The action of capitalism, as we talked about with the blacksmith, sees the blacksmith as not a person, but as a disarray collection of activities, breaks them apart, and then makes them more efficient, shifts them around, puts them in, say, an industrial block or a factory. Now, multiple people are doing parts of what a blacksmith would do. Makes everything more efficient, cost-effective, smart, great, until the next guy comes along who sees all of those pieces, breaks it down even further and further and further and further, until we have a factory in China that's effectively just a series of machines with two technicians. And honestly, we're getting to the point where those technicians we're going to replace, because we understand we decode constantly. And this is freeing. It's pretty good. We don't have a guy who's got to just basically slave away to make the same shit all the time, but we still do. We just have them doing different work than they used to. So that's because we have this second half. It's not just the deterritorialization, which is good. It's the reterritorialization, which is pulling back in, recoding, rebuilding, reterritorializing, and restraining and repressing. And this part we haven't gotten to in this section yet. We've only talked about, hey, look at how art, we're able to see the decoding of things. We're breaking things apart. There's with television signals, and I would say computer signals and LCD screens. Every pixel doesn't have the same meaning. The collections of things are placing. Images are ephemeral but instant, and we're able to understand them in a canvas in a very unique way. All of these things coming together very differently. It's really wild. So wait, if all of that's the case, and it is, then why are these people who are decoded themselves, who exist as decoded, why are they shunned, hidden away? Why are we talking about them as though they're sick? Why? What is it we're doing here? That is the other half. It's that recoding. This is the limit. This limit internal to capitalism, that capitalism has to keep going. And we'll be getting to it next week, because this is the answer, is the next paragraph, and then kind of the rest of the book. But this is where we make the switch from decoding, art, science, breaking everything down. Holy shit, all this stuff. Look at all the opportunities here, all the things we can attach to, all the beauty of it. Yeah, but all these things, this decoded mass, why is it that we hate this shit? So it's the other half. We'll be getting there. That's more or less the way I would talk through this previous paragraph. We can talk through, is there any parts of it that anyone is confused on, questioning, has a question about, anything on those fronts? Robin Page says, commerce, import, export, and trade have worked the same for thousands of years. Not really. Actually, not really. Like if we take back and we look at a person would travel, let's say, in Marco Polo style from the stories, with horses filled with goods, and he would take them from one place to another to buy or sell, buy high, buy low, sell high, and he would sell them en masse to another guy who would sell them to another guy. But that process changed with the East India Company, where suddenly we understood we could actually own, at a meta level, ports and countries and entire industries vertically integrated, where we would control soup to nuts the entire setup. By we, I mean a person or a group of people. That shift was seismic. It changed how everyone sort of integrated. The imperial process changed everything. Now with capitalism, we don't have the imperial process anymore. UK doesn't run India, for example, anymore. We don't, as Americans, we don't run South America anymore explicitly. Let me finish the sentence. It's not the same thing as it was 200-300 years ago, where explicitly the imperial formation, like the East India Company, required a very specific setup. Now capitalism, because everyone runs in dollars and everything is decoded, the trading and setup is completely different. I would even add that factories themselves over the course of the last 500 years with the Industrial Revolution show this. This is base marks, the way that we had a weaver, for example, or a village would work and they'd do weaving. They'd have lambs that they take care of. They get the wool, they spin the wool, they make yarn. Someone else weaves the entire thing. Maybe they have a loom, that setup. But then we have factory versions of that. And the early ones of that were basically having huge looms that were completely mechanically run, or run by people, but having mechanical parts who were broken up into doing parts of the weaving rather than the whole thing, whole cloth, you might say. And each of those parts then got broken down further and further and further to where you can buy right now a completely electric loom that will make patterns you want out of your computer. But now, and this is what they went through in the previous chapter, so now we've broken down as far as we can, we think, this code of the loom. But now the inventors who broke that down, they're the ones also being exploited by the very same system, who are having them then their work as the technician or the builder broken down even further and separated. It's the atomization and alienation at every step. Now, on one hand, yes. On the other hand, decoding means we're moving away from the hardline codes of you're doing this the rest of your life. That's all you do. You are a blacksmith, you do this thing, you do this labor, this setup. And those hard codes, not necessarily great either, because someone else determines that, like this setup. So capitalism is breaking all of these things down. They shift all of these things. And the process of manufacturing and shipping is even drastically different. We talked last week about how often you'll find strawberries grown in Washington state are shipped by ship to China, where it's cheaper to wrap them and transport them back and forth and then bring them back to the United States afterwards, because it's cheaper that way in mass. So everything is completely different than it used to be. It's all of this, again, not bad, the decoding side, because it's breaking down all the codes, breaking down the rules, shifting things, allowing us room to create the new all the time. But there's the second half. And that's the tough one. We'll be getting to it next week. The second half is recoding. MC, as humans, we are decoding and refactoring constantly. So how do we know what ground is? Primordial concepts like in Heidegger, or has it just been refactored too many times to tell? They actually are going to be getting into how, well, I would say not necessarily what the ground is, although there's a great book called What is Grounding that you might read from a guy named Deleuze. And also Empiricism and Subjectivity is on Saturdays. Yes, Ben, I will plug the reading. It's worthwhile reading. But it's less what is ground and more the thrust towards it, the demand for it, the feeling that we need it, the push that direction. Why? What is it about grounding that we need? I know it literally answers the question, Ben. Do you want to answer the question? Or do you want to force a reading? I'm trying to force a reading. Hopefully that's okay. Trying to force a reading. And then Robin has one last comment I do want to focus on, and then we'll finish up, because next week we'll be answering the question. So I would encourage everyone to come back next week. But this last bit, Robin says, none of this is bad on its own. The issue is the capitalists doing all of that for their own benefit alone, ignoring or even conspicuously acting against society's needs out of spite. This is presuming that the capitalist is also not materially produced, but instead exists transcendently. The capitalist as a person is just another person. They're all of us. Everyone is produced materially. Everyone. So if the capitalist wasn't there doing the thing, it's the old joke. If you were to have killed baby Hitler, would that have stopped World War II? No, because the conditions that gave rise to Hitler would continue. His birth wasn't the reason World War II happened. There were massive material conditions that produced the position in which a Hitler needed to be found and put in that position. Would it have changed things? Sure, a bit. World War II probably would have fucking still happened. The capitalist exists in the system as much as anyone else. It's important to realize they're also people. Now, their reasons for doing things, wholly different. Not disagreeing with that. But to put them in a plane where they're making choices, there's a small group of people who have total freedom and they have absolute control over everything they do, presumes, one, that they do have that, which I don't believe they do. If Jeff Bezos tomorrow were to turn Amazon into a commune, they would have him locked up, put in an asylum, and they'd put someone else in his place. He doesn't have that power. If Elon Musk tomorrow were to make Twitter open source, he couldn't. They would stop him. They would be stopped, because the process of profit, the process of X plus DX, profit from the exploitation of constant capital wage, the excess produced by wages, plus that of variable capital, gives us the ability to have more things, to grow, to build. And the system as a whole, how we determine and have our meaning found, is in the duality of these moments, the transition between them. Shouldn't say duality, the transition between the two. So we have the decoding on one side, which breaks things down, where we go, look, I've invented a new way to make a better mousetrap. Holy shit, that is a better mousetrap. Let's build that. Okay, cool, I built it. And now we have a factory and all of this stuff, and I'm making a lot of money. But that money isn't just for me to spend however I do. I'd love that. That would be great. And it would be great if that was the way it worked. But the other half of that is, now I have to prepare for the inevitable retraction that happens, the recoding, the second half of the movement of capital, where the next movement is going to happen now. And the factories have to be ready for that. We have to constantly be keeping up. Sure, a handful of capitalists get to have a lot of money. The system as a whole would not change. if we got rid of a bunch of them. So this setup as a whole is what we're talking about, how the entirety of capitalism operates. And that's the big deal, because without that, we end up in a position just purely of resentment, where look at these people who are rich. I hate them. I have no power. They have all the power. I'm going to do nothing and yell at each other and bitch and moan. And we end up castrated by our own action. We are made impotent because we see or believe we see that they have total freedom. They don't. Look at Jeff Bezos and his life. Look at the women he dates and the world he lives in and how he handles things. It's awful. It's extravagant, sure. That Elon Musk, if you don't think he's an Adderall addict who's constantly in a state of constant neurotic sort of response and fear and insecurity, I'm stunned. Because you just need a few seconds of that dude to see that shit. He has just obliterated his life, but he doesn't care. He seems to have everything. He seems to. Rich people always seem to. It's not really the way things work, though. But with that, Robin, I always love that discussion. Next week, we will be moving forward into the answer, where we talk about, just to read the beginning, the answer, as we have seen, is that capitalism is indeed the limit of all societies, insofar as it brings about the decoding of the flux that the other social formations coded and overcoded. But it is a relative limit of every society. It affects relative breaks because it substitutes for the codes an extremely rigorous axiomatic that maintains the energy of the flux in a bound state on the body of capital as a socius that is deterritorialized, but also a socius that is even more pitiless than any other. Beautiful writing we'll be making our way through. And this is where we will spend our time. This next paragraph might be the entire 2 hours. It was last year. I think we went through it for 2 different readings. But we'll get there. With that, I bid you all adieu. And please, if you like what we do, join us on Discord so you can get all the enjoyment of my awkward not sharing my video and terrible posting of random pictures and all kinds of shit there. And of course, the help of Ben and Elderon and others who run wonderful readings that expound these ideas far better than I do. We'll see you all next week, and thank you there.